If Code Violet caught your eye for looking like a modern Dino Crisis set in the 25th century, complete with dinosaurs, conspiracy, and third-person survival, hold on tight. There are a ton of important details that the trailer doesn't bother explaining. And it's not just about the story, it's about design decisions, the kind of experience the game actually wants to be, and even some controversies and launch choices that totally change how people will approach it. So today's video is about going beyond the hype. 10 things they didn't tell you about Code Violet. Things that, if you know beforehand, could turn the game into your next obsession. Or save you from an impulse buy. If you enjoy action horror, tense inventory management, and that feeling of I shouldn't be here, stay with me because this one has more layers than it seems. I'm Matthew, and the video starts now. When I saw Code Violet being described as a spiritual successor to Dino Crisis, I was automatically transported back in time. There's a very specific feeling in that type of horror. You aren't afraid of ghosts or demons. You're afraid of something that runs, bites, and doesn't stop, and that changes the pacing entirely. It's a more physical, more immediate panic that forces you to think fast while your brain is screaming at you to just run. The coolest part is that Team Kill Media seems to understand what made Dino Crisis work beyond just the dinosaurs, the third-person camera and the more direct action, but always with horror pulling at your leg. You can react, aim, and defend yourself. But the game keeps reminding you the whole time that you aren't the most dangerous thing in that facility. When the environment is tight, narrow corridors, a door in front of you, and noise coming from behind, the adrenaline hits just right. And that's where the detail that, for me, is the spice of this type of experience comes in: limited inventory management. I love it when a game forces you to make ugly choices like, do I take healing or ammo? Because that creates personal stories. You start remembering not just the jump scare, but the decision that put you in that situation, that moment where you thought, I can save some resources, and the game punished you at the first turn. If Code Violet truly embraces this formula, dinosaurs in tight corridors, tense third-person action, and resources that never seem like enough, it has everything it needs to hit that nostalgia without becoming just a copy. What I want is precisely this mix, honoring Dino Crisis but with its own identity, well-constructed scares, and that feeling of survival that makes you walk slowly, check every corner, and distrust even the silence. When I found out that Code Violet was made by only 4 developers, the way I look at the game shifted. Because it's not just a fun fact, it's the kind of information that makes you notice the details with a different level of respect, as if every environment and every camera choice carried more weight. It's almost like looking at a painting knowing the artist did everything alone, from the sketch to the finish. The craziest part is that these guys didn't just run the project with a tiny team, they put their own time and money into it. That gives off an all or nothing vibe, you know? It's not one of those productions where if something goes wrong, the loss is diluted across departments. Here it feels like every decision hurts and every success is worth double. You can imagine the number of all-nighters and the amount of rework it took to get things to the level they wanted. That's where Unreal Engine 5 comes in, because impressive visuals with UE5 usually make us think of big studios, giant pipelines, and people specialized just in lighting, just in materials, or just in optimization. When a 4-person team manages to achieve a result that catches people's attention in this engine, to me, it points to 2 things: a very clear artistic direction and a healthy obsession with polish. It's not let's try to make it look good. It's let's make it look good even if it's a lot of work. I like this kind of story because it reminds me why we fall in love with games beyond the marketing. It's the courage to try. Knowing that Code Violet was born this way, with self-investment, makes me want to play while looking for those small, hidden victories, a well-made texture, a well-built atmosphere, a scene that works as if they were notes signed by those who truly put their hearts into it. Look, when I read that Code Violet won't be coming to PC because of lewd mods, my first reaction was a bit of a disbelief-filled laugh. I mean, I understand the developer's concern about wanting to protect Violet Sinclair from the rampant sexualization that happens on the internet, but at the same time, it feels like a battle lost before it even begins. People who want to create that type of content will do it anyway, whether through fan art, edits, or even recreating the character in other games. So closing the doors to PC feels a bit like trying to hold water with a sieve, you know? On the other hand, I can respect it when a creative team puts their foot down and says, no, we don't want our work distorted that way. It's valid to have a vision and fight to keep it intact, especially if Violet was carefully built to be something more than just another generic protagonist. But then the question remains, to what extent can you control how people interpret or use your creation? Artistic integrity is great when it's within the official game, but what happens outside of it? Well, that's been out of your hands for a long time. What really bothers me is that this decision ends up punishing those who just want to play on PC normally with no interest in weird mods. And let's be real, the modding community also does incredible things, bug fixes, visual improvements, and translations that the developer themselves wouldn't do. Cutting all of that out for fear of a minority that will sexualize the character seems disproportionate, especially considering that console-exclusive games also become targets for fan art and NSFW content all the time, so the protection is somewhat illusory. In the end, I'm left wondering if this justification is truly the main reason or if there's something else behind it, like a fat deal with Sony or development issues no one wants to admit. Because in mid-2026, using lewd mods as an excuse to avoid PC sounds a bit outdated. If Code Violet is actually good, Violet will be remembered for what she represents in the game, not for what some dark corners of the internet do with her. And if it's not good, well, then not even a mod can save it. The addition of advanced lighting in Code Violet really grabbed me, because I'm the type of person who immediately notices when a game nails the atmosphere. You know those dark settings that aren't just lowering the brightness, but a darkness full of depth? Where every light seems to have weight and every shadow tells a story? If the game actually uses Lumen for global illumination and real-time shadows, we can expect environments that change mood as you move. And for horror, suspense, that is gold. Lumen usually shines exactly in that feeling of light bouncing naturally, especially in interiors. A narrow hallway, a dim lamp, and suddenly you see the light leaking onto the wall and shaping the space without needing tricks. In indie games, this is rarer because it's expensive in terms of optimization time and requires a lot of artistic care to not turn into a beautiful but washed out image without contrast. So, if Code Violet is aiming for dark and intense environments, the art direction will need to be very brave and precise. Now, ray-traced reflections are that detail that many people don't even notice consciously, but when it's there, you feel it. Reflections on wet floors, dirty glass, worn metal, these things give an incredible texture to the world and make the place feel more real, more uncomfortable, more immediate. And in a dark setting, good reflections aren't just for show, they become a tool for tension. Because sometimes you see a light or movement in the reflection before seeing it directly, and that messes with the player's head. And this Megalights feature from Unreal Engine 5 makes me curious precisely because it promises a leap in how the game handles many light sources without crashing performance. If they can fill the environment with small points of light, signs, LEDs, flickering lamps, gadgets, all reacting in real time, they can create that feeling of a living but hostile place. I really hope Code Violet uses this for gameplay and mood, not just for trailer screenshots, because when lighting becomes narrative, the game moves from pretty to memorable. The premise of Code Violet is one of those that I read and think, okay, this is going to start a discussion. Sterile humanity in the 25th century going back in time to kidnap fertile women is a heavy concept in itself because it touches directly on themes of autonomy, violence, and dehumanization. And when you put Violet at the center of that, you can't treat it as just a lore detail. It becomes the kind of story that needs a firm hand so it doesn't just seem shocking for the sake of shock. At the same time, I admit the mix is so absurd that it's hard not to be curious. Time travel, a bioengineered complex, and dinosaurs infesting the place. It's as if the game says, I'm going to hook you with the discomfort and keep you here with the chaos. This combination has huge potential to create constant tension because you aren't just dealing with humans doing monstrous things, but also with an environment that feels like a scientific error that spiraled out of control. What will define if this works for me is the tone. Is the game going to use this idea to truly criticize this kind of mentality? The ends justify the means, turning people into a resource, or will it fall into the risk of using female suffering as narrative fuel without much reflection? Because there's a very clear line between telling a harsh story and exploring a sensitive theme with purpose versus using it as edgy seasoning to look adult. If Violet is well written, with agency, choices, and a real presence that changes everything. And the dinosaurs, for me, could be the master stroke that gives the game its identity, as long as they don't just become random enemies. If they are part of this bioengineered ecosystem, almost as a direct consequence of the arrogance of this future humanity, then the game gains an interesting subtext. It's not just people messing with time. It's people playing God and creating a functional hell. If Code Violet can balance this thematic weight with a tense and coherent adventure, something very memorable could come out of it. But it's exactly the kind of story that, if handled poorly, becomes controversial for the wrong reasons. When I see a studio like Team Kill going public to defend their voice actress, in this case Elena Wyss, who voices Violet, I automatically respect the project more. Not just because she is an essential part of the game, but because online attacks are usually the kind of storm that many companies pretend doesn't exist until the person disappears, gets sick, or quits. The fact that they take this as something real, worthy of action, says a lot about the kind of culture they want to build behind the scenes. And the part about deleting posts and blocking haters also seems more important than it looks at first glance. Some people call this censorship or fragility, but honestly, on social media, a minimum of curation becomes a matter of safety and sanity, especially when the discussion moves away from the game and becomes harassment of a specific person. If the goal is to protect the actress's career and prevent the algorithm from rewarding harassment, blocking and cleaning the timeline is almost digital hygiene. Now, what I find most interesting in all of this is the indirect message. The character is fiction, the actress is a person. Many gaming communities still have this habit of mixing everything up, as if disagreeing with a trailer, an art direction, or a studio decision gave them a free pass to target the person doing the job. When the studio takes the front line and says, "Not here," it sets a limit that, honestly, I wish more companies had the courage to set. In the end, this also protects Code Violet itself, because it prevents the conversation from being held hostage by toxicity and gives space to talk about what matters, the game and the performance. In fact, Elena Wyss is directly associated with the project in marketing materials and videos, so it's very clear she is a face. And a voice the marketing wants to highlight, making protection even more necessary when the internet decides to turn any visibility into a target. The delays for Code Violet, slipping from November to December and then to January, give me that feeling of this is on the edge of acceptable, but maybe it's necessary. As a player, there's an automatic frustration because you've already planned, built up hype, and then the game starts disappearing from the calendar. But at the same time, when the reason involves Sony certification, I think better to delay than to launch broken and be left with that permanent stain of it arrived half-baked on PS5. And then comes the part that I actually think is much cooler. Turning it into a unified standard edition with everything included, pre-order bonuses, and deluxe items is a very direct way of apologizing without giving a speech. Instead of trying to convince you in a tweet, they put content on the table and say, "Okay, you waited, so we're going to deliver more." I like this because it reduces that annoying feeling of FOMO and I bought it at the wrong time. It's also a decision that shifts the perception of the game, changing the conversation from, "Wow, it's delayed again," to, "Okay, at least now it's fairer for everyone." For many people, especially those just watching from a distance, a single complete edition makes the purchase simpler. You don't have to keep comparing standard versus deluxe and wondering if you're missing out on anything. Deep down, this might even help the game gain some goodwill at a time when public trust has already been shaken by the postponements. Now, being totally honest, when this combo of multiple delays plus certification issues plus edition changes happens, I also keep my radar on for a turbulent production. Sometimes it's just the studio struggling with bureaucracy and final polish. Sometimes it's a sign that the project was more fragile than it seemed. What I hope is that this complete edition isn't just a treat to compensate for the delay, but that it comes along with the most important thing: a polished game, with good performance and without that feeling of disguised early access. The idea of New Game Plus at the launch of Code Violet gave me that, man, this is for people who actually like to play smile. The feeling of finishing the game and being able to start all over again immediately with all your weapons, items, and collectibles is like an immediate reward for the time you invested. There isn't that barrier of, oh, now I have to redo everything from scratch, or I'm going to lose my progress. And that makes replaying much more inviting, especially for those who enjoy exploring every corner of the map or testing different gameplay combinations. What I like most is that by keeping all collectibles and discoveries, NG Plus becomes almost the definitive mode of the game. It's as if the studio themselves said, now you know the world, so enjoy everything you discovered. This gives a sense of freedom, being able to test strategies, relive moments, or even enjoy the story in a different way without having to redo tedious missions just to get equipment back. And, of course, this increases the game's value. If you're the type who likes replayability, you know that often the biggest problem is the time you waste redoing everything. Here, NG Plus starts with everything, so the game rewards you with convenience and variety, which is rare, especially in indie titles. It's like a silent thank you from the studio to those who dedicate themselves, and it ends up creating a stronger bond with the title. Now, being realistic, I hope this NG Plus doesn't just become repeating the same path with more power, but that it brings some novelty or extra challenge, whether in enemies, alternate endings, or different mechanics. Because in the end, what makes an NG Plus truly worth it is when it gives you real reasons to come back, not just the possibility of playing again with everything you've already earned. I think it's really cool when a game cares about this kind of small detail, like keeping dinosaur corpses visible for longer instead of just making them disappear 2 seconds later. This completely changes the sense of impact in combat, because you look at the environment and see the consequences of what just happened. To me, it's the kind of thing that doesn't show up in a trailer but makes a real difference when you're playing with headphones, tense, walking slowly, and checking every corner. There's also a strong psychological side to it. A body on the ground is visual proof of a danger that has passed, but could return. When the game erases everything instantly, it feels almost too clean, as if the world were just waiting for you to turn the camera to reset. By keeping the cadaver for a generous distance before the fade out, the environment feels more credible and grittier, and that helps sell the idea of a hostile place where you aren't the center of the universe. And there's a practical side. This can even change how you navigate. You start recognizing the path by what you left behind, almost like macabre breadcrumbs. Okay, I've been here. This is where I took down that beast. In a game with chases, tension, and backtracking, this kind of organic marker can greatly increase immersion because it's your survival story being recorded in the environment. I just hope they nail the technical balance, because keeping bodies for too long can mess with performance, clutter the visuals, or even create accidentally comical situations. But if the fade out is well calibrated, it's one of those details I love. It's not about realism for realism's sake. It's about the world feeling consistent and remembering what you did. And for me, that's one of the best ways to let a game stick in your head after you put down the controller. The explosive pre-orders. To be quite honest, give me a mix of excitement and a healthy dose of skepticism. Excitement because If Code Violet actually reached third place on the PS Store, that's huge for an indie studio. It's the kind of thing that changes the team's future, pays the bills, ensures longevity, and opens doors. But at the same time, pre-order rankings are a thermometer for hype, not an automatic guarantee that the game will deliver everything people are imagining. When a small studio says this, it's usually not empty marketing. It's people who, from one day to the next, go from survival mode into, okay, now we can plan the next project mode. For those who follow indies closely, it's crazy to think that a game that could have gone unnoticed is suddenly in the same spotlight as giant franchises like Diablo and Resident Evil 9. That's a comparison I love and hate at the same time. I love it because it shows the public is willing to bet on something new, not just what's already famous. But I hate it because this kind of showcase also puts a brutal spotlight on the game. Expectations soar, demands become disproportionate, and any bug or weird decision becomes a headline and ammunition for the internet to make its usual drama.